Welcome back to another episode of Fantastic Descriptions. I'm Neil Aiken, and today we're going to look at, we'll look at the term narrative description. We'll take it apart and think about what exactly is narrative and what exactly is description. How these two terms don't necessarily mean the same thing, but come together in sort of the act of role-playing or the act of game mastering or dungeon mastering, storytelling a particular scene. Let's begin first with the idea of narration. So what does it mean to actually narrate something? Well, narration implies that there is an order, that we're recounting the occurrence of something and we're giving details of that event or series of events in the order of their happening. To tell it out of order would not make sense. Whereas the word describe or description is to convey in words the appearance, the nature, the attributes of something. And in this case, the emphasis is less on sort of fitting this within a chronological context, a particular time context, and instead implies, well, it carries with it a sense that if we describe something, this is a personal description. This is our vivid recollection or our vivid observation of something. And the vividness of it is what is supposed to jump out. The sense of its personal nature or intimate acquaintance with this thing allows us to describe it well. And so plain or bland descriptions immediately feel false or distant or incomplete. We're not interested in sort of a description that might say it was a big car outside. We want to know more about that. Or I was struck by a large cat is not enough. We need to know its context. We need to know other details to make sense of that. We feel like there's a story there. And this is really where the two things come together. So when we talk about narrative description, or at least how I use it when I'm talking about what we do as DMs and GMs in a role-playing game, I'm really talking about the fact that that we need to, the order that we give these descriptions, these intimate, detailed accountings, or, we're conveying the appearance of something or making it come alive for the listener. The order in which we do that helps them understand, fit it into a narrative, fit it into a larger set of events that are unfolding in front of them. And so narrative description then is really description or a series of descriptions that builds a narrative or inspires players to participate in a narrative, that there is an implication that something is going to follow after that description. Let's dig a little deeper into what exactly is happening when we describe something. And I think a good way to do that is to actually turn to the world of poetry. When we look at what happens, especially in contemporary poetry, but really in the study of any poetry, a lot of it revolves around description. And one of the great American poets, Mark Doty, has a fantastic book called The Art of Description, which goes into significant detail into the thinking behind what's actually happening when we describe things, and how does that help us as we write poetry. Well, I'm going to say that really what he has to say here about description is going to help us understand how we can be better at describing things for those that are listening, those who are at our game table, whether physically or remotely. So let's go to that then. So in this quote that you'll see here, Mark Doty says, "What descriptions, or good ones anyway, actually describe then is consciousness, the mind playing over the world of matter, finding there a glass various and lustrous enough to reflect back the complexities of the self that's doing the looking." So let's unpack that a little bit. So really what he's saying then is, like, when we describe something, it's not only an accounting or a detailing of specific characteristics of the thing that we're describing. It's also, as we describe, that description reflects back the mind or the person doing the describing. Let's think about the difference in description coming from two different characters. One, let's say, an NPC who is a farmer or a peasant who stumbles across a minor treasure. Maybe it's a chest, a small chest containing a number of jewels and jewelry. To this character, to this NPC who is perhaps completely untrained in terms of the world of gemology, has no study of geology or commerce, for that matter. These might be a collection of pretty stones and fancy jewelry, and that might be it. They might discuss or describe things in terms of color and shape, and sort of an impression, here it goes back to the consciousness, an impression of its perceived value, how much this person might contextualize it and put it into the sense of this must have belonged to someone who was very wealthy. A jeweler, or someone who is involved in the trade of jewels and jewelry, gems and jewelry, will find a wider variety of vocabulary available. And so if you have a different NPC, let's say the adventurers come across this bag or chest of jewels and jewelry, bring it back, and find themselves a place to sell it. They might find a merchant that specializes in the exchange of valuable commodities like gems and jewelry. They might go to a moneylender or a pawn shop, wherever it is, or their fence. They go someplace, and this person has a completely different set of knowledge. And with that knowledge comes jargon and vocabulary and a depth of knowledge, sort of a wider variety of things to pay attention to. So whereas the peasant may have looked at the gem or the jewel or the jewelry setting and only thought about color and shape and perceived value, the jeweler or the pawnbroker or the fence is going to notice other things. They're going to notice approximate age, the sophistication of the cut. They're going to notice the setting. They're going to notice damage that's been done, possible repairs. They're going to notice the style and aesthetic value of it. And they may recognize the maker of it. So, or the difficulty of the cut, which might raise it, or the quality, the clarity of the gem. Things like that, the peasant's not paying attention to. The jeweler will pay attention to. But herein lies a different problem then as the DM or the GM. How much of that specialized knowledge then do you need to impart through the character or the consciousness of the NPC back to the party? Some NPCs will slide directly into field-specific jargon, their area of expertise, and they will use this very specific language, often incomprehensible terminology, to obscure and obfuscate what it is they're actually doing. Listen to me, I just did the same thing. So basically, what I'm saying is that an expert might speak like an expert, ignoring the level of comprehension that their audience has, your characters, because they wish to demonstrate their expertise or to use it as a form of intimidation. And sometimes it's because they want to obscure something they're withholding. So they might rattle on a list of details, a list of very specific observations, and yet withhold the fact that this particular object or item might have been owned by someone who is well-known, a legendary figure, and therefore, despite the fact that its material value might seem small, its cultural value is high and therefore worth something to someone else. And so they may just, they may kind of describe it in a way that leaves it less desirable so that they can pocket the difference or make a profit off of the difference in what is perceived as value versus what its actual inherent value is. The other reason experts sometimes don't use expert language in specific detail might be because they do not want to come across as an expert. And this may be for both Maybe both for benign reasons, like they want to present themselves as being on the same level as the characters, able to speak the common language and communicate at the level that makes sense for this particular exchange. So, it's not necessary to go into the specific details of like settings and clarity and cuts with the characters, because the characters are not trained in this field. And so this is shop talk and no one's going to care. And I think, on a metagame level, the players probably don't care, and the DM might be wasting time in covering this level of detail, unless it's important to the narrative, unless this is some detail that's going to be pertinent to the plot at hand. I think that you have these two parts of it. People withholding specific detailed language and description for personal reasons, for psychological reasons why they might do this, and for social reasons. But then there's also, the fact that sometimes they will pretend. You have characters that, NPCs that pretend to have a knowledge that they do not have. And this can be fun, just to make up terms and details that no one can verify, and that make it clear, perhaps, to the characters, if not the players themselves, that these things are a complete sham. So I think you can play with this level of description. Do you need to use this all the time? No. I think when it comes to sort of the level of description that comes out of NPCs' mouths, think about it as like, this is in your toolkit, but this isn't necessarily something you have to do with every single moment. I would say that at critical turning points in a campaign or in an adventure, when an NPC is given, so to speak, the mic to say something, let that be the moment in which their particular psychology, their perspective on the world, colors the language of their description. So if you have someone arriving at the beginning of an adventure, for instance, then the way that they are going to communicate the threat, the challenge, the opportunity they're presenting to the characters, that will be colored by their psychology, their consciousness, their experience, and their skill set. Whereas, if you happen across a merchant or happen across someone else along the way, especially if this is not part of the story, unless your players are really enthused by this depth of roleplay and world building, this might be something you just pass. You might you might give each merchant NPC some small psychological thing that they're focused on. It might be that this one is obsessed with a particular color, this one collects, like pigs or something. And you might, like, if it shows up in conversation, then that's a little level of complexity that you reveal. And that level of detail comes out sometimes in their descriptions of things. And something, could be as simple as that. And it just pops out as something unique about that merchant. And then they're no longer just, merchant A, merchant B. They're, oh, that's the merchant that is obsessed with pigs, or they have a collector that's buying pigs. And that might open up a whole different thing that your characters run into later on. And the world becomes a little bit more interconnected. I think that's kind of delightful. I guess where I'm going with all this is that I think when we're looking at description through consciousness, it is always, we go back to those things we talked about. It is the consciousness of the characters, and it's the consciousness of the NPCs. And beyond that, that's about it. But anyways, I think this is a good place to stop. Next time we'll kind of pick up and we'll look at so the description of space and scenes, and thinking about like I guess you could say the phenomenology of our encounter with rooms, which sounds really complex. Let's just call it describing a room. There we go. So stay tuned. If you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed my rambling sometimes, please subscribe and stay tuned for more. I'm going to try to do some more deep dives into different parts of description and narrative as we go on, and we'll tackle different things throughout the coming weeks. Take care and stay safe and stay well.